immigration is clearly Trump's number one issue, and he would make really arbitrary claims. This claim is worse than false.
They are evading the fact that they and the country generally has not displayed the necessary strength. And this blaming Latin American immigrants is just a way that helps them convince themselves that they're being strong.
In the way I think about Harris is not as much as what she says, but what she doesn't say about immigration. So she's totally running away from the issue. This actually is saying is that, the immigrants, we are going to use the immigrants to reach our ends, whatever those are, and the government should establish what it deems those needs of the country to be, not because they have an individual right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the pro-American perspective. Immigration has become a major point of contention in this election season. Donald Trump has made his anti-immigrant stance clear since the first time he ran for office in 2015, and Kamala Harris has been mostly dodging the issue during her young campaign. In our opinion, neither of these candidates get this issue right, and worse, neither are moral when discussing this issue, although there are important differences between the two. ARI, as a 501c3 organization, does not endorse political candidates. We only provide a philosophical analysis of their ideas and proposals. And it is up to you to decide what to do with this information, if anything. Welcome to New Ideal, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Agustina Vergara, an associate fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute, and with me is Ben Bayer, a fellow at the Institute. Hi, Ben. Welcome.
Thanks, Agustina.
So, Ben, we're going to talk today about both candidates and their stances on immigration, and we are going to be very, very critical of both of them. And I want to begin with Donald Trump. So, one thing that I've noticed about Donald Trump ever since, he became a candidate in the first time in 2015 is he always seemed to sort of be running on the issue of immigration, but for this election season it's gotten I think much more pronounced, and the attacks on immigrants and immigration and the dehumanizing, frankly, of immigrants and the scapegoating since that he's been doing since 2015 has been getting much more virulent over time. And if you pay attention to any appearance that Donald Trump does about any topic in any context, he is always bringing up the issue of immigration and saying, we have all these people pouring on the border. They're going to change our culture. We are a society in decline because of these immigrants coming through the border, including, for instance, if you recall that when he was found guilty in his recent trial, so he went out and talked to the press immediately after the jury's verdict, and he started talking about how this was a plan by Biden and Harris to silence him, and then he immediately started talking about, but he said we meanwhile we have all these people pouring down the border. Everything comes back to immigration, and in ways that are very denigrating. Remember back then when he ran for the first time for office, he was talking about how Mexico allegedly sending the rapists and criminals. He's always treated immigrants as like animals and vermin. So this sort of rhetoric has gotten really, I think it was bad to begin with, but it has gotten much worse. And I think that part of why he does this is because he has found that his base gets really, let's say, riled up by these sort of statements, and he has found this kind of enemy in the immigrants that he can blame things on and that he can attack constantly, and his base is going to respond positively to it.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to ask our audience to think about on this topic, especially if immigration is a concern for you, and if you sympathize with the things that Trump says about it, just as a little test, when did you first start thinking this was a problem? When did you first start caring about it? Was it only recently? And was it because of something that actually personally affected you? Like, did an immigrant do something bad to you? Did an immigrant take a job that you actually thought you were qualified for? Um, and if not, what then was it that got you thinking about this? Why, for example, didn't it bother you if you've been following U.S. politics for a while? Why didn't it bother you in 1986 when there was another spike in border apprehensions about equal to today's? Why not in 2000? These were under the Reagan and the George Bush II administrations. Why is it only now, when there's a spike under the Biden administration, that you suddenly care about it? And for what real world kind of reasons, as opposed to people in my circles are talking about it and saying terrible things. Um, and if there isn't a reason beyond this is what lots of people in my circles are talking about, why isn't that evidence that this is just being pulled into a tribal political kind of witch hunt, a phrase that Trump always likes to use himself? Um, and I mean, it's true that it, immigration involves the mixture of cultures, but it's interesting the way that Trump talks about how it's going to kill our country, how it's going to kill the culture of our country. Most of the immigrants who are coming in from Latin America are Christian and Western, and that's usually not too different from the people in his base that he's appealing to. So, what is it really that he thinks is the threat to quote unquote our culture and our country? Well, it's not like he thinks there's something about the ideas that are a threat, because the ideas are no different than his. And that's, I think, really what underscores the rather primitive tribalism of the appeal that he's making. Because, and especially this is going to come out in a few more of the examples we talk about under the Trump campaign, it's rather a base, primitive kind of tribalism that he's appealing to here.
Yes, and that's not to say, obviously, that there isn't a problem with the issues at the border, right? And we'll discuss that later too. But also, like this fear mongering about immigration and the scapegoating of immigrants that has been happening. Unfortunately, this tribalism around the issue has been happening essentially since before the country was actually founded. So it's something that we have been seeing, and it's a tool that certain people use to try to rile up the bases. This kind of like this out group that is gonna come here and kind of like invade us. Like first it was the Europeans, then it was the Asians, and it's the Latin Americans now. It's kind of like an old trick to rile people up, I think. And part of this that we're discussing, like, came up very explicitly in the debate, right? So he, like Trump, I mean, immigration is clearly Trump's number one issue because he kept bringing up immigration when he was talking about like virtually every other topic. He would still bring it back to immigration, and he would make really arbitrary claims, such as that claim that he made that Latin American countries are emptying their prisons and asylums and sending criminals to America, and that's why allegedly crime is down in Latin America because all the criminals are here now, which is not true, to say the least. And then another claim that has gotten so much traction, and it's been over a week, I think, since this happened, and it's still getting talked about in the media, which is to say a lot with our 24 hours news cycle, is this claim that um, the immigrants from Haiti are abducting and eating the pets of Americans, specifically in Ohio. So there's a lot to say about this claim, and also not just the claim itself, but how the media has reacted to this and the whole discourse around it. But what part of what's important to highlight about this claim, and frankly it applies to many other claims that Trump and other politicians have made on this topic, is that this claim is worse than false. It's Like the media says, okay, it is actually not true, but it's worse than that. It is arbitrary. It lacks any sort of evidence. And it's a claim that Trump and others who are still making this claim make with a complete disregard to reality. I don't think to these people it actually matters whether the claim is true or false. It doesn't matter as long as it helps them achieve their political ends. It's a complete disregard for reality. As long as this claim helps me attain my goal or bring attention to this issue that I want to talk about, it does not matter whether it is true or false. And I think that is what's going on with this immigrants eating cats claim and other claims that have been made that are similar.
Yeah, it's really I want to underscore what you said about how it's worse than false, how it's arbitrary, how it involves complete detachment from the evidence in reality. And I know there are people listening who are going to push back against that and point to what they think is their favorite evidence for this. But it is worth really stressing that none of the alleged evidence has actually panned out as actual evidence. So, like, you find a video of somebody killing a cat, they turn out they're not actually Haitian. Um, that's not evidence, and if you had to go looking for it in the first place to justify your claim after the fact, that's already a problem. So I mean, it is possible for there to be an eyewitness uh, testifier to a crime. So, like, if somebody's actual pet goes missing and then you find it in the neighbor's basement and it's been eaten, and the neighbor's Haitian, that would be one thing. But that's just not what's happening. There's no such evidence. The best that J.D. Vance was able to provide, according to a recent article in the Wall Street Journal, was a police report from somebody who thought uh, their pet had been stolen by their Haitian neighbor. Well, it turns out they found Miss Sassy in the basement, still alive at her own home. Look up the Wall Street Journal on Miss Sassy. I mean, so there's just no evidence, and just random allegations from basically people on social media is not evidence. And no more than if I take if some crazy person on the subway platform is talking about the end of the world is coming, that's not evidence that the end of the world is coming. And as it turns out, in Springfield, Ohio, a lot of these allegations were being made by actual literal neo-Nazi groups. So to revisit a point also, so it's not like if you go looking for evidence of something, you're never going to find something you can more plausibly assert to be evidence. Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute, did something like this. He looked really hard, and he found a video, not of anybody in Springfield, Ohio, but in Dayton, Ohio, a different city. And they weren't Haitians. They were from the Republic of Congo, and they were cooking something that was maybe a cat. We don't really know. That's concerning, perhaps, if it turns out to be true, but that's at best trying to excuse somebody who's already engaged in arbitrary speculation by finding something that sort of justifies their story after the fact, even though it's not really quite the same story. It's really embarrassing that someone would have to do that when the level of political discourse has fallen to such a low level that basically made up Nazi claims end up becoming arguments in presidential debates. And it should be no surprise that when the political climate is tribalistic, which means it's not focused on any kind of philosophic ideological principles, it's focused on personalities, it's focused on direct emotional appeals, it should not be at all surprising that arbitrary claims become the coin of the realm, in effect. One way to see this from the current controversy is, how shall I put it? Suddenly conservatives care about animal rights. So it's not like there's some principle against meat eating that the political right has long championed, that now it is once again coming to the defense of in this case to save our neighbors' cats from the Haitians. Obviously, if your cat is stolen, that's something you have reason to be concerned about. Of course, we don't have any people who are actually willing to stand up and say their cat has been stolen. So it's clear it's a calculated for its emotional effect. to rally the tribe. And here I have to say, you know, the left has acquired a bad reputation for calling everything they don't like racist. But and for that reason, they might be reluctant to say it about this because they know they've acquired this bad reputation for over attributing it. But here's a case where it looks like there's a pretty plausible charge to be made. The tribalists here are rallying against another tribe. It's probably not a coincidence that the Haitians are predominantly black. And I mean, if you know about the anti-Semitic blood libel, the allegations that circulated in Europe in the 19th century about how the Jews would kill children and drink their blood. I mean, this is a miniature version of that. So yeah, it is racism, and anybody on the left who alleges that, it's pretty hard to refute that. So it doesn't surprise me, Augustina, uh, that that Trump is now, I think, finally realizing he needs to change the subject, and he's talking about banning mortgages for illegals, and he's talking about putting price controls on credit card interest rates, like borrowing a convenient page from the playbook of the left, because yeah, that whole "they're eating our dogs and cats" racist trope from the debate didn't really score them any points uh, beyond the core committed tribalists at the base of his movement.
I agree, Ben. Yeah, and they have moved on to, or trying to move on to other things. However, it seems that it's going to be a hard thing for them to do because this has gone really viral. There are memes everywhere reminding people that these allegations were made. But anyway, moving on to, so what Trump did at the debate, frankly, is essentially what we just said in terms of immigration, just a bunch of arbitrary claims. So there's not a lot to discuss about, much more about the debate. By the way, Harris wasn't better. We'll talk about her in a moment. But I want to discuss briefly the actual platform for Donald Trump's campaign. And you can find it online, the Republican platform, that is. And the platform essentially makes a lot of assertions that are also not true. So it essentially, what it claims is that America right now has open borders, this phrase that people like to use, meaning what open border means is like, to them, is like anyone can just walk in here unchecked and just enter the country with no basic restrictions. And what the platform implies in its language is that there is absolutely no vetting of immigrants. And part of what it says is that there are jihadists entering the country, because it says like we will explicitly ban jihadists from entering the country, like as if they were entering here now. And that is absolutely no true. There are no open borders in America. I mean, if there were open borders in America, we wouldn't have a border, an actual border that is collapsed with people, and we wouldn't have migrants going through horrific long journeys to get to the border to show up and ask for asylum. They would just, take a plane and just fly to New York, fly to anywhere that they need to go. And the issue of vetting, so this platform, what it does, it says, we're going to ban all the jihadists and the communists, and as if we weren't doing that right now, right? So our current law, as you know part of what it does right, is it does keep these sort of actors that have an intention to overthrow or the US government or to commit acts of violence. They are already being kept out. Terrorists are banned from entering the United States, but the platform implies that they are just walking in, right? And it also bans members from the Communist parties, that people that actually are committed to the overthrow of the American government. So the current law already uh, forbids these people from even setting foot in America as tourists, even, like, let alone as actual immigrants. There's a difference there too. But part of what the platform also says is, and I quote, it says, Republicans will use existing federal law to keep foreign Christian hating communists, Marxists, and socialists out of America. Those who join our country must love our country. Close quote. So this is what Trump has been calling, and not just now, but also has been calling before in his previous, actually during his government, this quote extreme vetting. And what I'll say now about extreme vetting, I have an article out. You can look it up in a New Ideal. I have much more to say about that, but I'll say that I am no fan of our immigration laws. Um, but as bad as our laws are, they thankfully and rightly don't exclude people for being, quote, Christian hating socialists. Why? Because our constitution prevents government from conducting ideological screening. And that is a great thing because we are not Venezuela and we are not Soviet Russia. And it seems that Trump is actually the one that wants to take us closer to that direction in terms of freedom of speech with these sort of measures that he wants to take.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up, Augustina, on some of the things you were saying about jihadists and how the platform is appealing to fear of them as rationale, as I think rationalization for further border restrictions, further immigration restrictions. And I asked this question before. When do you remember, if you're concerned about immigration, actually first becoming concerned? And was it something actually affecting you, or was it just the talk in your circles? And by asking that, I don't mean to suggest that there's nothing in the real world that could trigger the talk. But the question is, how is that talk conceptualizing what there is in the world? And I think that the issue of terrorism is one that's relevant here. Like, I don't think that Trump is just out of whole cloth making up all by himself uh, concern for immigration that nobody shared before him. That's not my point. My point is that tribalistic thinking operates on a lower level than proper conceptual principle thinking does. And it tends to cover up and evade the real concerns in the world. And if you ask me, if concerns about foreigners leading to concerns about immigration started anywhere, I think it was in a kind of unclearly conceptualized fear of foreigners that came after 9/11. And you might say, well, isn't 9/11 a pretty rational, justifiable reason to be skeptical of foreigners? And on some level, it is, but you have to conceptualize it properly. Yes, so there were foreign governments and foreign entities and foreign groups that want to destroy America, but who are they and what do they stand for? Are they uh, random people coming across the border from Latin America? No, that those are both foreigners, but certainly not the same kind of foreigner. And I think at the core of this fear here, as what's usually at the core of widespread social fear, is not a rational identification of a danger that an actual enemy actually opposes, but that mixed with the fear that comes from knowing that you yourself have not done what you need to rationally oppose that threat. And here I think the American right is simply in a state of denial about what happened after 9/11. They're in a state of denial about the fact that for all the wars we fought, none of them actually targeted the regimes that posed the actual threat. And this is why Iran is still ascendant today, and Al Qaeda is still doing terrorist attacks in countries like Mali as of just yesterday. I think nobody wants to identify, nobody even on the right wants to identify that proper steps have not been taken to combat our actual enemies. And so they are to assist in that evasion. They find ways to, in effect, pretend that they are taking the proper steps to oppose the threat, steps that are much easier than the ones that need to actually be taken, which gives you then a sense of pseudo self-esteem, like that we're strong and we're the strong ones when we shut down their border. But remember this. Remember the disparity between shutting a border to stop Latin Americans from coming in and actually taking military steps to end the Islamist regimes overseas that pose the greatest threat. When this side, the political right, talks about how they're the party of strength. No, they are evading the fact that they and the country generally has not displayed the necessary strength. And this blaming Latin American immigrants is just a way that helps them convince themselves that they're being strong. But it's like if you ever experienced when growing up, there were people who maybe they were being bullied at school and they couldn't stand up against the bullies, and so they took it out on their siblings at home. I mean, that's in effect the position of the Republican Party today. That's the kind of strength they're talking about, and that's a complete evasion. America is still in denial about what happened after 9/11. This is a symptom of it, I think.
Yeah, and I wanna highlight too, one of the things that tries to pass as a policy to address this issue, which is the issue of deportation. So there's like the Republican platform, and then there's like the summary of the 20-point summary of the platform, right? And the first point, which also gives you the tells you that this is the number one issue for Trump, is number one, seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Number two, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. And then Trump has vowed to deport 11 million illegal immigrants. He has never said how. In the debate, he was actually asked, "How are you going to do this?" And he did not answer. But it's important that it's important to ask, like, okay, you're going to deport 11 million illegal immigrants. What does this actually mean? What does it mean for government power? Like, does it mean that they're gonna be federal agents from immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, going door to door, like looking for illegal immigrants? Where are once you capture once you detain these immigrants, where are they going to go? What are you going to do to them? Who's going to pay for these measures? There are like so many questions that this quote policy or this quote plan to deport 11 million immigrants that raises so many red flags in every possible single level, from philosophically and like what it actually means to do this for government, to what are the practical implementations of it.
I think the how question here is really important, and just to see why it is so implausible that there is a how here. Pretend just for a moment that there's nothing at all unseemly about having detention camps for millions of people in this country. Pretend like the police state that you would need to establish in order to investigate all the businesses that hire these 11 million people would not be even more intrusive and concerning than the IRS today, or whatever kinds of pressure that the Biden administration put on social media companies earlier. Just pretend for a moment you don't have those kind of standard moral objections to these kinds of policies. Put it just purely pragmatic terms. How do you do this without completely crashing the economy on top of the tariffs you're saying you're going to impose overall? I mean, that's 11 million people who are working in jobs around the country that most Americans don't want to take. How are you going to do that without dramatically destroying our productivity? And I think the answer is you don't. You can't do it without doing that. And I think Trump has got to know that. And I mean, my speculation that you'll have to see if I'm right about this, but should he be elected, my guess is this doesn't happen. Just like the wall didn't happen, that it's a big lie. I mean, he rightly asks Kamala Harris all the time, why haven't you and Biden done the things you've promised yet in your first 4 terms? Well, why didn't he build the wall in his 4 years? So what I suspect will happen, they'll do some token roundups. They'll strike fear into the heart of American business, and they may end up actually being worse because of the way they are allowed then to bully uh, businesses through the uncertainty and the terror that creates for them. But they won't be able to round up 11 million people, just like they couldn't build the wall. And then, of course, since they didn't build the wall, those 11 million people, if they leave the country, well, what do you think is going to happen next? Well, many of them will just try to come back without a wall to stop them. So this is a big lie that is preying upon the kind of magical thinking that voters are subject to during campaign season, when promises about what government can fiat and what it can't are thrown around with abandon.
I'll say Trump built some miles of the wall, but he didn't build the wall like he was campaigning on. We're gonna build this impenetrable wall that is gonna fix the problems at the border and it's gonna be the ultimate solution, and Mexico's gonna pay for it. Well, neither of those things happened. Part of it is like I was there at the border, I saw the wall. I mean, the wall has a bunch of gaps in between, so you can just walk around the wall. But that's not also what's important, is that the wall itself is not a solution to the problem that Trump is allegedly trying to address. Even Border Patrol, who I have talked to, will tell you a wall helps, but it depends on where you are at the border, and there's a lot of things that help on top that the wall needs to be added to it for it to be effective. And sometimes the wall that is not even a thing that actually works and is effective. And then another point that I want to say is I don't want to minimize, I'm not saying that you did, but I want to be very clear. I don't want to minimize the fact that Trump, if elected, would probably do roundups that are going to be absolutely terrifying and violent, and the immigrant community rightly right now is scared of that prospect, and they have gone through that sort of roundups that have been absolutely brutal and have left families completely destroyed, among other horrific things that have happened with that. So not to minimize that, but the whole we're gonna deport 11 million in 4 years, that is something that he's making up to for the purposes that you just described.
You have to think about what kind of scruples it would take to make up a big lie of that nature that would involve such, if implemented, horrific impacts on people's lives, both illegal immigrants and American citizens.
Yeah,
But we should
and
talk
legal
about
immigrants.
Harris.
Yeah, no, I was going to say legal immigrants as well, because Trump is also going after legal immigrants, but that's sort of a separate topic. So yes, I want to talk about Harris now because she's not better in many respects. So what is Harris? So there's, in the way I think about Harris, is not as much as what she says, but what she doesn't say about immigration. She really doesn't say much about it. So she's totally running away from the issue. She does not want to talk about it. She just gives you, when asked about immigration, a word salad that leads you to other things. So you could see that very clearly in the debate. In the debate, when asked about immigration, she was asked, "What are you going to do differently, or what would you do different than Biden?" And she starts bringing up the border deal, but doesn't really say if she would have done anything different. She sort of conflates drug trafficking with immigration, and she used most of her time, with a lot of time in the debate to talk about immigration. She used it to talk about Donald Trump and attack Trump, versus actually taking a stance and discussing actual factual proposals that she may have. And when she brings up the border deal, what she emphasizes all the time is that is this it's so but it, the border deal that she talks about is this failed bill from earlier this year that was an agreement after months and months and months of discussion between Democrats and Republicans on what to do about the border. right? And what she emphasizes is that it was supported by some of the, as she says, most conservative members of Congress. And she, there's a lot in that deal, but she vaguely mentions any of the substance of the deal. She mentions that it would have added some border patrol agents. She says that it would have stopped, drug smuggling, but she does not say what is she actually going to do. And then she goes on to talk about how Donald Trump killed the deal because he wanted to run on immigration, which I think is probably true. But she doesn't explain any concrete policy. She's kind of referring the voters back to this failed border deal. So if you want to know what she's going to do about immigration, you have to track that bill, read it, which is like 300 pages. And she does not explain anything concrete. And she wants to bank on the fact that this was a bipartisan deal. I mean, if the Republicans were okay with it, then it must be tough. But if the Democrats were okay with it, it can't be that bad, right? So I think she's banking a lot on that, and she's again like trying to avoid talking about it. And then the issue of conflating immigration with the drug smuggling. I want to mention this because the issue of drug smuggling certainly relates to border security, but not to immigration in the way that Harris explains. And I find this a little bit irritating when people talk about this as if they were equal, because it is what conservatives have been doing, kind of like packaging together the horrific violence of drug smuggling and cartels, drug cartels, with the immigration of people that are coming here to work. These are not same things. Immigrants are not bringing drugs into the country. The vast majority come here to work, but this conflation doesn't help. There are ways in which, like again, drug smuggling is a border issue, but it's not an immigration issue.
Yeah, you're right for sure that it's not as though uh, most of the people coming across the border are just doing it to smuggle drugs. One thing I would say here is that there is an important connection between drugs and immigration. If you talk about so-called root causes, there's been a lot of controversy about how Harris was allegedly supposed to go on a trip and discover the root causes of the immigration crisis, and they blame her for not having done anything with that knowledge, which is probably true. But what is the knowledge? What are the actual root causes of this problem? That would be something important to know. And if you asked me, I'd pick two things in particular. One of them does have to do with drugs, but not in any way that anybody in this debate is willing to grapple with. And that's the fact that the drug war, which of course is something Harris is bragging about having helped to fight as a prosecutor. The drug war is the major political policy that is responsible for so much of the political instability in Latin America that is causing people to want to leave their countries and come here. I mean, especially in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, where cartels run the countries and there is widespread terror because of it. That is why people want to leave these countries and come to a safer place. And yet that's because of our drug policy. That's because of our horribly paternalistic idea that we can stop grown adults from deciding how to what substances to put into their bodies. And then because it's pretty hard to manage it's hard enough to manage it domestically and locally, we export that war to other countries to try to cut off the source. Well, it's no surprise that this is the result, but nobody in this debate wants to mention that, because people like Kamala Harris just want to tout their street cred by saying, I have strength, I can go up against these drug dealers. Well, yes, that's precisely part of the problem. And of course, the Republicans can't say that because they don't want to sound like they're soft on drugs. The other root cause here that Kamala Harris in particular is not in a good position to want to mention is socialism, because half of at least a couple of the major countries that people are fleeing right now are Venezuela and Cuba, and that's because of the socialist policies that the Maduro regime and the and the Cuban regime have imposed on their people, making them economic basket cases, such that yes, of course they want to flee. Now you'd think that Republicans could pick up on this fact and see, the fact that there are all these freedom-loving people who want to come to our country to escape socialism, this would be a reason to welcome them, and then to blame Harris for endorsing the premises that lead to socialism. And they could criticize her for not wanting to name this fact as a root cause, but of course they themselves don't want to have to grapple with that. Not as we did a podcast last week on how Kamala Harris is not a communist, she's not a Marxist, but she certainly does share the left's general sympathy for socialism, and so she therefore doesn't get to talk about what's wrong with the economic system in Venezuela that led to this collapse, that led to this torrent of immigrants. And it's another reason why she can't come out, and we're going to talk about this more shortly, it's why she can't come out in favor of the principle that one could actually use to defend free immigration, because what free immigration essentially is a kind of free trade. It's a kind of economic freedom, the ability to trade with people across borders. It's about the importance of being able to seek your happiness and economic opportunities. That's what economic freedom is all about, but that's a principle that the Democratic Party, to the extent that it shares the premises of socialism, is of course very afraid to come out in favor of.
Part of what I found really appalling of that Harris did at the debate was given this opportunity to talk about immigration and make her stance, and responding to Trump's irrational attacks that have been ongoing. She just used that opportunity. What was the audience? I read 65 million people were watching it, or something like crazy number like that, not to mention people that watched it after. This massive platform that she had. What did she use it for? To talk about uh, completely aspects completely unrelated to immigration, like how are Donald Trump's rallies, oh, people leave out of border and exhaustion. What are you talking about? Is that your response to Donald Trump attacking immigrants, as he has been doing for almost a decade, but more virulently so now? Like, is that your response? When asked about what would you do different or the same as Biden, you don't mention one of Biden's most successful initiatives for immigration, like the CHNV program, the private sponsorship program on immigration that brought down border crossing numbers dramatically for the countries that it benefited. So her response, for instance, to this absolutely arbitrary claim that we were just talking about the immigrants eating cats, her response was to laugh and say, talk about extreme. And then she proceeded to talk about why and who of the Republicans, former Trump aides endorsed her, and proceeded to attack Trump. That is how you respond on the issue of immigration. Like, that is how you respond to these attacks by Trump. I find that absolutely maddening, and I can't. It makes me really upset. I can't believe that she did something like that. And then when asked at an interview, I think it was yesterday, the day before this interview that she did, she called this claim of immigrants eating pets a crying shame, and then went on to ramble about different things. That's Harris's response to the attacks on immigration, just evading the issue and just laughing it off, essentially.
Yeah, I mentioned before that it's an important fact that the left has acquired a reputation for seeing racism everywhere and for over attributing it everywhere. And I have the sense that they've figured this out about themselves, and now they're afraid to use it when it actually matters, when it's actually there. And so that's part of why she uses the talk about extreme language instead of calling it what it actually is. So there's a kind of boy who cried wolf lesson here for the left, for one thing, but then to comment on just the use of the extreme pejorative generally. I mean, this is part of the same standard package deal of so-called extremism that the left has been using for decades, which, what does it do? It packages together who are the people who are supposed to be extreme or extremist? Well, there are the people who are extremely racist, like the Ku Klux Klan, with uh, Republican defenses of free markets, who want to have extreme economic freedom. And Ayn Rand wrote a, a an analysis really skewering this package deal, this anti-concept, in her essay, uh, The Extremism or the Art of Smearing, which I highly recommend people taking a look at. But notice that what happens when you use that smear habitually, well, what you're trying to do with it is you're trying to say these people like Barry Goldwater, who believe in free markets, they're as bad as the extreme racists. You're trying to smear the advocates of free markets with the sins of the racists, which they don't deserve. Well, that has the effect of smearing advocates of free markets, which of course Trump is not anymore, never really was. But it has the effect of smearing real advocates of free markets, but then also diluting the charge against actual racists, against actual racist dog whistles. I think that's exactly what is happening here. When you've over attributed racism so much, and you don't want to sound like you're still doing that, so you call it extreme, gets you out of the allegation of the stereotype of leftists. But now you've basically said nothing, or you've uh, dramatically uh, failed to call out a really evil thing, which I think is what Trump was doing when he brings up the cat and dog eating allegation.
I want to talk about these proposals that Harris wants to pass as actual policies. So there's this quote issues page in the Kamala Harris campaign website, and she talks about different issues, including obviously immigration. And what she says here about immigration is, in part, and I quote, that we're going to have tough, smart solutions to secure the border, keep communities safe, and reform our broken immigration system. This and saying essentially nothing is the same, because this doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mention how is the immigration system broken. I would love for her to answer that. What would she do to fix the system? I think the system doesn't work, but I bet it's for very different reasons that she thinks. What is it that needs to be fixed, and how is it going to be fixed? And then says our immigration system is broken and it's comprehensive reform that includes strong border security and an earned path to citizenship. What does comprehensive reform even mean? What are the principles that are going to, if something is so comprehensive, it means essentially going back to the drawing board. I don't see any indication of that. And path of citizenship for whom? Why doesn't she say the word illegal immigrant, or the euphemism that the Democrats like to use, the undocumented or unauthorized immigrants? She does not say anything about that. And again, the website brings up this failed bipartisan border deal, but it doesn't say, not even the website says what actually she would take from the deal, what it even is, what is the gist of it, other than hiring, I think, is 1,300 more or 1,500 more border patrol agents. So again, as a voter, you're expected to go track down that 300 pages long failed border deal and try to understand what it is that she's going to try to do with immigration. And by the way, the border deal is not, quote, comprehensive reform at all. And I think there's a really long discussion that we could have about the border deal and the provisions in it. But I think it has some good measures that would place a band-aid to help stop the flow of people at the border, but ultimately it's not any kind of comprehensive reform or anything remotely similar to that. It's essentially adjusting a few things here and there of the system that we have now, and it won't ultimately fix any of the problems with immigration and border crossings and all of that we have. The good aspect of the bill, which maybe it's what she's referring to when she says fix the system and things like that, but doesn't really meet that standard, is that the border deal does include increasing legal immigration, but just like the numbers that we have right now and the categories that we have right now, just bump the numbers a little bit. That is not comprehensive reform. nearly at all. So she's just using this bipartisan label to do a lot of heavy lifting for her. And I think actually tricking people into thinking that it's a good bill, that is going to reform the system that we have, is going to stop the border problems. And it's actually not at all what it's going to do.
Yeah, I want to underscore your point that this has come up several times now in our conversation, that increasing the amount of legal immigration really is the long-term solution to the problem at the border. If the what's specifically happening at the border is what's motivating you here, well, as you've argued many places, Augustina, that's because they're not able to take the ordinary legal means of transit. They can't just take a
No.
plane and fly from Guadalajara to Chicago to take an open job. Instead, then you get this completely artificial concentration of people uh, at a physical border trying to sneak in or otherwise declare asylum. And that, and as you've pointed out, when in the past we've increased options for legal immigration, border apprehensions have dramatically fallen. You mentioned the sponsorship programs that allowed for that from Venezuela and from Cuba and from Haiti. So that is the long-term solution. And I should mention part of that is no longer seeing immigration primarily in terms of asylum seekers. It's instead seeing it as about seeking opportunity and allowing more and more economic opportunities. We're not here to save victims. We're here as a country to create opportunities for ourselves by trading with people who are willing to trade with us, wherever they may be coming from. All that being said, I also want to clarify, and I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating. Yeah, there really are short-term problems at the border, real security, humanitarian problems that threaten not just the immigrants themselves, but the US citizens who are living at the border and their property. And long-term solution for that is legal immigration. But yes, you also need to address it short-term with more spending on border patrol and border guards. And uh, I'll say, like I've said this before, I'm not philosophically opposed to a wall to protect the property of citizens living there, as long as it comes, as part of a longer-term solution, which is more legal immigration, which means you can build a wall as long as you have more open legal doorways, is a way of packaging it. But yeah, so you need short-term security solutions at the border, which, while you've pointed out lots of reasons why this bipartisan bill was limited and wouldn't go very far, and that's part of the reason why the Republicans claim they didn't want to vote for it. They say, it didn't put enough of a cap on asylum seekers, which might be true. I have problems with the whole category of asylum seekers as a way of thinking about immigration, but it did increase funding for security at the border and hiring more border guards. So even if you didn't think it went enough, wouldn't you still, given that this is a short-term problem, at least want to spend more on border guards? And it would seem that you would. And so if you then didn't, well, the only reason you're torpedoing it is really just for political reasons, isn't it? In order to give Donald Trump an issue in this election.
Yes, and both of these candidates claim that they are for freedom, that they are the truly American candidate. And now the Democrats have started waving the flag a little bit more, like as we saw at the convention. And both Trump and Harris are so American, right? But like, no, like the way that they talk about immigration, both of them, and the way that they collectivize immigrants is exactly the opposite of an American approach to immigration. So, I mean, I don't have to say much, I don't think, about the way that Trump and the Republican Party talk about immigrants. We just said, like, the way they collectivize, they demonize the immigrants. But even the Democrats who allegedly are in favor of immigration, they do the same type of thing. So if you go to the Democratic Party platform, the longer document, it says the legal immigration system does not reflect the needs of our country. And so it seems that this actually is saying is that, the immigrants, we are going to use the immigrants to reach our ends, whatever those are, and the government should establish what it deems those needs of the country to be. in terms of immigration. And we will allow people to come here only if they fulfill those needs, not because they have an individual right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the pro American perspective, and a right to move and work, but because American, quote, needs them. That is not an American way to think about it. And part of the implication is once immigrants are not, quote, needed anymore, we can, stop welcoming them, or we can kick them out or whatever. We don't need them anymore. And they Harris and many other immigration advocates, including outside of the Democratic Party, say, we need this comprehensive reform. But they go on to defend immigration on these sort of terms, like we need immigrants. And this is part of the premise of the system that we have right now, that they are allegedly fighting against. It's we need, with the whole separation of like skilled immigrants and caps on like how many can come to work and all that. That is the need, that system based on need. That is what we have right now. So stop trying to advocate for immigration and for doing more of the same thing. And then part of the other aspect of our immigration system, one of the other kind of like cornerstones of the system, is what you just said, Ben, kind of like this humanitarian angle, asylum, the institution of refugees, family reunification. It's kind of like this other aspect of it, focusing on kind of fulfilling these alleged altruistic duties of America. And it's like the more oppressed you are, the more you suffer, the easier it is for you to come here. Like the more family members that you have here that you want to reunite with, family reunification is the, quote, easiest, because I put it in quotes because it's not actually easy, but it's the most straightforward way to come into America. Are you trying to come here just to work, to make your life better? It's much harder for you to do that. And I think that, as again, like you said, I want to second that. There are many measures that can be taken to kind of like in the short term stop this flow and kind of like reorganize things, but it won't work long term unless we have a solution of expanding legal immigration. So Ben, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just on the to wrap up on the issue of the role of altruism in this debate. You mentioned the overtly altruistic orientation of some of the immigration policies the Democratic Party advocates, and that plays into my general view of American politics, and that is as follows. The Democrats are the overt representatives of altruism and egalitarianism in American politics. They're the ones who most overtly talk about how we are our brother's keepers, and how the selfish need to sacrifice to the needy, etc. This is part of the reason why they are understandably confused with socialists. They're not socialists, but they have all the same premises, and they make the premises, they advertise them quite openly. They shy away from this only when they know it will cost them votes. I think that's part of the reason why Harris is not wanting to talk about the policies that she actually stands for in relation to immigration. But generally, they are overt, they're open about their altruism. The Republicans, by contrast, are not exempt from the dominant Western thinking and culture on ethics and politics. They, especially because of their connection to Judeo-Christian religion, are still under the spell of the altruist morality, only they are more covert about it. They are afraid to admit it, mainly, I think, because they are afraid to admit to themselves. This isn't so much of an issue of being cynical politically, though there's an element of that, especially with Trump. But generally speaking, Republicans, I think, are afraid to admit to themselves that the Judeo-Christian morality of altruism implies an anti-American outlook politically. They're afraid to admit that if you think you are your brother's keeper, there is just no real good case that you can make for economic freedom and capitalism and for the projection of American strength in foreign policy, because after all, shouldn't we love our neighbor and turn the other cheek in response to provocation? So they covertly accept the altruistic premises, the Judeo-Christian altruistic premises, but they want to hide that from themselves. They don't want to admit what the implications of their own philosophy, their own morality are. And as a result, they need evasions. They need evasions that will help them hide the implications of their own views from themselves. And so this ties into the point that I was making before about 9/11. They want to believe that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and therefore they want to think that the wars we fought after 9/11 were some kind of exercise in strength to some end, and not a complete waste and not a sacrifice, but uh, their own morality and their own philosophy is telling them, no, it's not actually a good thing to exercise strength. We need to turn the other cheek. And so in order to ape to themselves, in order to fake for themselves that they have some kind of strength, they have to pretend, no, actually, uh, we are we are fighting the real fight that we need to fight, even though they're not fighting the real home of Islamic terrorism in the world, which is Iran. Even though they are appeasing our enemies altruistically, they want to pretend that, no, they're actually exercising strength because they want to build a wall, because they want to fight off the enemies that are allegedly closer to home, even though they pale in comparison to the real threats in the world. And likewise with the immigration issue, which is, as you can see, connected here, because they want to pretend like they're protecting the freedom of Americans from these dastardly immigrants. Uh, Even though, of course, what this means in practice is sacrifice, even though what it means is sacrificing the freedom not just of the immigrants, but of American citizens, and further causing the intrusion of the state into economic affairs, and further downplaying the importance of pursuing economic opportunities, and downplaying and negating the value of economic freedom. They don't want to admit to themselves that that's what they're doing, because they like to think of themselves as the American party. But actually they're operating on a kind of tribalistic premise, which is a kind of collectivistic premise, which is a kind of form of sacrificing one party to another, which is an embodiment of that Judeo-Christian ethic. And so, I mean, Augustine, what I think the truly American response to all of these problems is, and would be, is to start by exercising the strength that it takes to face the facts, to call the facts what they are, to face the fact that, yes, we have been altruistically appeasing our actual enemies for decades now, that we haven't been exercising the strength to protect our rights that we should, and to be okay with that admission by saying and acknowledging that altruistic appeasement is bad, that America is the country of the pursuit of happiness. That, of course, means coming to grips with and starting to think critically about the Judeo-Christian morality. That looks hard to do only if you've habituated rationalization and evasion in the way you think about politics, and you've been doing it for decades. You don't have to be that way. It's actually the simplest thing in the world to look at the facts and to be honest. And that kind of strength is actually easy.
That's very well put, Ben. And I want our audience to also reflect on what these candidates try to pass as policies. These proposals don't meet the threshold for policies. They are talking points that are designed, in Trump's case, to pander to his base, and in Harris's case, to avoid talking about the actual concrete actions to be taken for immigration, because this is a losing issue for the Democrats, because they have been bad at it, truly. And you have Trump on one side, these arbitrary attacks on immigrants and the tribalism that I think, frankly, makes him absolutely morally repugnant. And then you have Harris, who watches this happen and doesn't respond to it with a principled, true American stance, despite the fact that she claims to be for freedom. She avoids the issue, she looks the other way. Shaking her head in response to Trump's diatribes is not the American response to these attacks. I think people should demand much better of their candidates, and actually demand a truly pro America response to not just the issue of immigration, but all of the issues. So that wraps up our episode for today. As usual, some resources that our audience may want to look to learn about our topic today. We have an answer of Ayn Rand about immigration and a Q&A that she was asked about immigration and what her position is. And we follow, of course, as the Ayn Rand Institute, the position of Ayn Rand on immigration. And then I would like to highlight two recent podcasts that we did. One is called The Problem with Pro Immigration Arguments, where Onkar Gate and I explore why the alleged pro immigration arguments are actually detrimental and they're philosophically flawed. And then a podcast called A Legal Crisis on Immigration, where we talk about part of what both Democrats and Republicans, the discourse around immigration that is so damaging. So, as usual, if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and please like and comment and share if you like this episode. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode or you have suggestions for future ones, please send us an email at newideal@aynrand.org. We read all of the emails and we reply to many of them. So, with that, thank you, Ben, for joining me today, and thank you for your audience, and we'll see you next time.